It was going to be a typical parliamentary session, one of those expected days where speeches filled the House, replies flew back and forth, and politics unfolded in its usual pattern of thrusts, counter-thrusts, and drawn-out debates. South Africans listening in anticipated nothing more than the same old den of promises, criticisms, and party apologia. But all those hopes were dashed in a second when Gayton McKenzie, Patriotic Alliance leader, stood up with an envelope tightly gripped in his hand. He did not speak softly. His voice boomed through the room, commanding silence, demanding attention in a manner that could not be avoided. And what he asserted next left not just the members of parliament flabbergasted, but also millions of viewers across the nation in a state of shock. With hot-blooded fervor, McKenzie asserted that he had in his hands evidence of an international warrant of arrest pointing to none other than President Sir Ramaphosa. This was not rumor, not overheard gossip, not second-hand tattle so prevalent in the political world. No, he asserted this was documentation, actual, physical, and irrefutable proof. He waved the documents high in the air, brandishing them like a beacon of light carried by the Sanchi through the darkened halls of power. His charge cut through the room like a knife. He said the president was not just corrupt but was actively hiding behind the ramparts of power to avoid accountability as regular South Africans went on suffering under the crushing burden of crime, corruption, economic ruin, and a government plagued by mismanagement. The response was instant and explosive. The House was plunged into a tempest of chaos. ANC lawmakers stood up, yelling McKenzie down with anger, denouncing him as a liar, a troublemaker, a threat to the democratic process. Seats across from them, opposition MPs sat agog, some applauding in solidarity, others calling for calm, trying to make sense of what they just heard. For viewers, it was obvious this was no ordinary political swipe. It was a naked declaration of war in daylight with the entire nation watching. McKenzie has never been one to stand back from a fight. His image for honesty, for plowing over political euphemisms, has always made him a divisive figure. But even by his own standards, this was remarkable. He was going further than anybody thought, blaming Ramaphosa not only for failure as a governor, but for being an international embarrassment. In one fell swoop, McKenzie turned the discussion from local scandal to international consequence, making the president's alleged offense not only a domestic embarrassment, but an international shame. The warrant was not a fabrication. According to McKenzie, it was not rumor. It was, he insisted, official, binding, and unmissable. His voice thundered with passion as he insisted that South Africans had the right, no, the obligation, to know if their president was wanted outside the country. For him, this was not about competition or machismo. It was about accountability at the highest level, about justice and truth, about the national moral compass. For years, rumors had circled South Africa's leaders. Corruption scandals, state capture probes, suspicious deals, these tales were part of the nation's political narrative. But few had ever had the courage to rise in parliament and deliver a bombshell so big. McKenzie presented the moment as the final test of democracy. Would the ANC opt to shield one man, or would South Africa stand up to defend its people? As cameras homed in on President Ramaphosa, the country held its breath. The president remained still, his countenance serene, but his tension betrayed in the tightness of his jaw and the clenched fists. He did not say a word. Around him, ANC friends burst out in indignation, rushing to his defense with shouts and cries, branding the charge as malicious falsehoods, charging McKenzie with impropriety and irresponsible political drama. But for all their hooting, Ramaphosa's silence cried louder. Silence in politics is never innocent. To McKenzie's allies, that silence was confirmation. To the ANC, it was a tactical maneuver, a refusal to give unsubstantiated claims the value of a response. But to the millions of everyday South Africans watching, listening, clinging to their screens, it seemed suspicious, disturbing, almost incriminating. The question reverberated from home to office to social media: is it true? Parliament was reduced to a war zone. Some MPs ran towards the Speaker, insisting McKenzie withdraw his incendiary allegation at once. Others cried that the President had to speak out for himself, that there was no more room for silence. The Speaker's gavel banged repeatedly, but order eluded them. Cries escalated into chants, fingers pointed across the chamber, and members walked out in rage. Suddenly, an opposition MP stood up above the chaos and yelled, "If that's a lie, do it now." The words lingered in the air. The ANC benches bellowed back in outrage, and again the demand went unfulfilled. Parliament was in disarray by the time the session finally closed, descending into sheer chaos. South Africans were left with more questions than answers in the midst of confusion regarding whether their president was actually the target of an international arrest warrant. For Ramaphosa, the stakes could not be higher. If McKenzie's allegations were untrue, then he had no option but to eliminate them in quick and decisive fashion. Every second of delay would only serve to fuel the fire of suspicion burning out of control. But if the allegations were true, the ANC was facing a scandal of monumental proportions, one that risked not only undermining the credibility of the party but also the legitimacy of the government of South Africa. The president was caught between two cruel realities. Now remaining silent could put him in the position of being guilty, while confronting the charges head-on could legitimize them. It was the familiar political trap between the rock and a hard place with no escape in sight. What was happening was no longer about one individual or one politician's charges. It had expanded into a struggle about the soul of South Africa's democracy. Scandals came and went for far too long, and the leaders escaped scot-free while the people suffered the costs. This time, however, was different. With accusations of a global warrant, the world's attention was now upon South Africa, probing its leadership and challenging its stability. The country was at the crossroads. Would this be yet one more outrageous chapter that eventually died into nothing? Or would it be the event that pushed transparency, accountability, and truth to the center of political existence? Opposition parties, as is to be expected, pounced on the opportunity. Julius Malema and the EFF threatened to summon emergency sittings, and the Democratic Alliance called for nothing less than a full-blown inquiry. The smaller parties, also having their say, demanded that only open disclosure was acceptable. Everyone agreed the truth must out, however painful, however destructive. The issue was no longer one of personalities. It was about principles. It was about the people's right to know who was governing them and whether such a governor bore the taint of international criminality. Whether McKenzie's assertions would hold up against evidence or fall apart under examination was not yet clear. But one thing was already beyond dispute. History would recall this day. It would be remembered as the day when Parliament was consumed by fire. Not actual fire, but political fire. A flame of accusation and outrage that could not be put out.